Investigations. Despite economic hardship, Wike allocates 10 billion naira for rent, furniture to Akpabio, Tajudeen to others. Hello viewers and welcome to Infogist TV. The allocation is contained in the 288 billion naira supplementary budget President Bola Ahmed Tinubu transmitted to the National Assembly in September, which was passed within 5 days by the lawmakers. The presiding officers of the National Assembly, Senate President Godswill Akpabio, Speaker Abbas Tajudeen, and their deputies, Baru, Jibrin, and Ben Carlo, were allocated 10 billion naira for rent and furniture in the 2024 supplementary budget of the Federal Capital Territory. Investigations review. The budget items titled Renting and Furnishing of Presiding Officers of the National Assembly has the classification code 230100309 in the 288 billion naira supplementary budget President Bola Ahmed Tinubu transmitted to the National Assembly in September, which was passed within 5 days by the lawmakers. Under the Nigerians bicameral legislative system, there are 4 presiding officers of the National Assembly: the Senate President, the Speaker, the Deputy Senate President, and the Deputy Speaker. These 4 are the latest Nigerian government officials to receive lavish accommodation allowances or new housing projects from the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Minister Wike, whose generosity in the last 15 months includes a 21 billion naira residential mansion for Vice President Kashim Shettima. The Abuja minister also allocated 25 billion naira for the construction of houses for 40 judges. With the planned rent and furniture budget, Mr. Wike appears to have extended his generosity across the 3 arms of government: executive, judiciary, and legislature. The allocations come amidst the current economic hardship in Nigeria, which experts believe is due to the government's policies of deregulations of the petroleum downstream sector and the devaluation of the naira. Within the last 3 weeks, dozens of Nigerians have died in stampedes while trying to collect food items. The current administration has continued what many describe as lavish spending while preaching austerity measures for most Nigerians. Some of these expenditures include a $100 million presidential jet, the botched presidential yacht, luxurious sport utility vehicles for members of the National Assembly, and others. Mr. Wike has in the past been accused of using some of these generous spendings on institutions as a subtle means of compromising them, but he has denied the allegations. According to Section 299 of the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as amended, the President is the governor of the Federal Capital Territory, while the National Assembly serves as its legislative arm. Also, Section 302 of the Constitution gives the President the power to appoint someone as the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory to act on his behalf. Mr. Wike, a prominent member of the opposition People's Democratic Party (PDP), was appointed by the President Tinubu in what observers believe is a reward for the role the former Rivers State governor played during the presidential elections in 2023. The Federal Capital Development Authority owns several public buildings in the Federal Capital Territory, including the National Assembly Complex and other structures, through the Department of Public Buildings. Some of the buildings in the department list on its website include the Supreme Court Complex, the Presidential Complex, the Federal Ministry Building, the Assembly Complex, and others. In 2022, the Federal Capital Territory spent over 42 billion naira to renovate part of the National Assembly Complex, despite public outrage by Nigerians over the expenditure. In the past, members of the National Assembly, including the 4 presiding officers, had their accommodations at the legislative quarters located in the Apo area of Abuja. However, the buildings were sold under the monetization policy that started under Olusegun Obasanjo's administration. Initially, all the buildings were sold except those for the presiding officers. In the 6th Assembly under the Umar Yar'Adua's administration, the buildings were sold to the 4 presiding officers: Senator President David Mark, Deputy Senate President Ike Ekweremadu, Speaker of the House of Representatives Demeji Bankole, and Deputy Speaker Bayero Nafada. In 2011, the government opted to build new houses for the presiding officers on the outskirts of the city in Katampe extensions behind the Lungi barracks. However, the lawmakers reportedly rejected the offer. Later, the Goodluck Jonathan's administration started another project just for the 4 presiding officers. The project is located within the 3 arms zone, very close to main gate of the National Assembly. 4 years construction on the buildings has stalled despite several deadlines. Despite this, premium times lands that the government has resorted to renting houses for all the presiding officers of the National Assembly since 2011. According to sources, Senate President Godswill Akpabio lives in a rented apartment in Maitama, a high-brow area of Abuja, while the Speaker lives in Kuzambe district. Mr. Wike, in a letter dated 11 September, an address to the President Tinubu, requested additional spending of 288 billion naira as a supplementary budget for the Federal Capital Territory. He listed some of the projects the funds are meant for. Under the capital component, the supplementary budget contains a total of 32 projects. The purpose of this letter is to seek the approval of Your Excellency for the second supplementary budget presentation to the National Assembly, a supplementary budget to the 2024 Statutory Appropriation Act of the Federal Capital Territory Administration in the sum of 288 billion naira, necessitated with a view to accommodate additional inflows from internally generated revenue and miscellaneous revenues in the sums of 8 billion naira and 280 billion naira respectively, Mr. Wike said in the letter. The request by the minister was approved by the president, who subsequently transmitted the supplementary budget to the National Assembly for approval. This request was approved by the lawmakers and passed. Of the 32 projects, 22 were existed ones that received additional fundings, while 10 new projects were introduced into the Federal Capital Territory budget. For instance, the 25 billion naira earmarked for the construction of houses for judges got an additional 5 billion naira, increasing the budgetary allocations to 30 billion naira. In addition, the legislature, the Federal Capital Territory, also allocated 20 billion naira for the renovations of the State Security Services headquarters in Abuja. The 10 billion naira budgetary provisions for the presiding officers in vague and raises a number of questions. What kind of rent? What kind of furniture? Why is the Federal Capital Territory paying the rent of these officers when the National Assembly has its own budget? Why is the Federal Capital Territory spending 10 billion naira on rent and furnishing when there are existing housing projects for these same officials? The National Assembly has its own budget, and to guarantee the independence of the institution, it receives its funds under the statutory transfer instrument. That is, its budget is given in a lump sum and not broken down. In the past couple of years, the National Assembly's budget has continued to grow despite fiscal constraints. In the current fiscal cycle, the National Assembly has a budget of 344 billion naira, the highest over. Ordinarily, one would have expected the federal legislature to use these funds to address all its needs, including the rent for its presiding officers. Why is the National Assembly not paying the rent for its presiding officers despite these record allocations? Also, there is an abandoned housing project for these same officers that has remained uncompleted for close to a decade. It was also reported and gathered that the buildings located within the 3 armed zones are intended for the Senate President, Speaker, Deputy Speaker, and the Deputy Senate President. However, these 4 buildings, which have been roofed and plastered, still remain incomplete over a decade after construction began. Why is the Federal Capital Territory not spending the 10 billion naira to complete these buildings instead of allocating funds for rent and furniture? To get answers to these questions, a newspaper submitted a freedom of information request to the Office of the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory to seek clarifications on the planned expenditure, addressing some of the questions raised. However, the ministry ignored the request. This appeared to be a recurring pattern under Mr. Wike's administration, where the budgets of the Federal Capital Territory are not made public and requests for information are routinely ignored. Premium Times also submitted several FOI requests to the ministry in the past, all of which were disregarded. Similarly, the spokesperson of the Senate and the House of Representatives did not respond to requests for comment. Senate spokesperson Yemi Aderimoju neither answered calls placed to his phone nor responded to a text message sent via WhatsApp. Meanwhile, Akin Rotimi, the spokesperson for the House, initially answered the call placed to his phone and requested that the questions be sent to him via text. However, after the messages were sent, he did not answer subsequent calls. To understand the significance of this 10 billion naira allocated for the 4 individuals, it is essential to compare it with other similar expenditures. For instance, in the proposed 2025 budget, the federal government allocated 11.5 billion naira for the construction of 20,000 housing units under Renewed Hope Agenda Housing Scheme. While this project could potentially serve 20,000 households, these 4 individuals are allocated 10 billion naira for rent. Additionally, in the proposed 2025 budget, the federal government's National Housing Program nationwide has an allocations of 5.3 billion naira. This amount is approximately 50% of the 10 billion naira set aside for the rent and furniture of 4 individuals. Just before embarking on the end of the year holiday, lawmakers in the lower chamber pulled half of their salaries into a fund to support the government in addressing economic hardship. The total contributions amounted to 704 million naira, which the House stated would be presented to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu for distributions to vulnerable members of society. However, this 704 million naira is just 7.4% of the 10 billion naira allocated for the rent of Mr. Tajuddin and his 3 colleagues. These allocations to the 4 presiding officers underscores what many describes as insensitivity and a lack of transparency in the use of public funds.